Yeah, I'm doing great. I was up late last night, diving through all the Gitcoin climate projects, getting ready to have this conversation today, and also just really just trying to understand how different groups are using the platform. So it's just inspiring to see.
Nice, man. Super exciting. Yeah, you probably dove deeper than I have. I've kind of spent a fair bit of time putting a couple of grant proposals together and then been blown out of the water by some amazing generous donations and just seeing the incredible power of the community and the platform they've built. So yeah, super excited to dive into Gitcoin a little bit. How's it going today, Sai?
Sure.
How are you today, bro? Sai, if you can unmute, I'm not sure if you can jump on, just say hey.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm actually trying to figure out why this is not coming through my my Bluetooth headset, but yeah, doing good.
Nice. Awesome, man. I'll invite you up here as well, Rob Dog. It's hard to scroll through the list of all these people. This is so exciting, guys. I'm super humbled and grateful to see all these amazing people here jumping in to check on the ReFi space. We'll let a couple other people join, but yeah, basically everybody, my name is John, and I am kind of a newbie to the DeFi community, but I kind of started looking at this space. Hey, Kevin, good afternoon, my man. What's going on?
Chilling. My call ended early, so I'm happy to be able to hang out with you all on here and talk about ReFi stuff. It's going to be cool.
Cool, super fun. Yeah, I was just giving a quick intro and setting the stage. We're waiting for some of the Toucan and Klima folks to join, but we got here with us Cody Sims from MCJ, Rob Dog from Toucan, Sai Ziggy also from KlimaDAO, who's been jumping on the Toucan stuff, and then of course yourself, which is awesome. And we might have some other people jump in and talk as well. But yeah, I was just saying, in essence, I'm kind of new to the DeFi space and really looked at crypto specifically from the lens of how it could address the climate crisis. And so got on board the KlimaDAO train relatively early on, not as early as some, but really motivated and inspired by this model of kind of making it possible for people to invest in climate action and make a difference while also potentially making a return on capital, which is really cool. And then sort of fell deep into the weeds, so to speak, of the underlying protocol and discovered Toucan and some amazing people there, a really sort of beautiful, generous and mindful, committed culture. So I've gone pretty deep over the last month or so and just feel like I'm kind of being drawn to the ReFi ecosystem as a whole. And I feel as though there's this kind of movement happening at the intersection of climate action and crypto that has a lot of potential. And I think I really wanted to host these community hangouts. It's just a way to create a safe space for new people to enter, for existing people to share what they're up to ask hard questions, to look at some of the problems we're trying to solve and the potential solutions we're addressing. And just be kind of clear-eyed about the state of the world that we live in. You know, I think climate change is quite a overwhelming and daunting challenge at hand, but we've got some brilliant people who are setting their hearts and their minds to this. So the last two couple ReFi community hangouts were a bit broad and just trying to touch base with, you know, everybody in the space, hear what folks are doing. But I thought in chatting with Cody the other week that it warranted potentially like a deeper dive and exploration to dive into some of these protocols and just learn the communities that are surfacing and some of the theories of change. So yeah, that's kind of what we're up to. Cody, love to hear your background. I've diving a little deep in what you're doing, but curious what you guys at MCJ think about the whole ReFi space and just get some context from you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I'm excited to see such a broad and diverse group of folks that I recognize quite a few handles in the group here. You know, some folks that are definitely deep down the crypto rabbit hole, and some folks that are very not deep down it at all. And I love seeing that type of collaboration come together. And so, you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with the work we do at MCJ or My Climate Journey, MCJ started as my partner Jason, who's here in the audience, as his way to explore how someone with a background like him could help with climate change. Right? Jason was a successful entrepreneur who built a mobile fitness app over the last decade or so, and didn't really know how to make an impact in climate. And a lot of what MCJ is about is exploring how disparate solutions can come together when people put their own skills to work to try to solve the problem of climate change. And so what's really attracted me to the ReFi space and to everything going on in the crypto world is it is a group of people who have incredibly deep skill sets in a really unique area and incredibly new area that are trying to figure out how to leverage those skills the best way they can. You don't have to have a PhD in atmospheric science to make a dent on climate change, potentially. If you know how to help change markets and how to help drive incentive structures and how to leverage the power of community together to do those things, you can make a really big difference yourself potentially. And I think that's sort of what we're starting to see. At MCJ, we're one part community, one part content arm, and one part capital source. We invest in early stage venture-oriented startups. And, we're obviously really intrigued by the movement that's starting to happen here. And, the opportunity for folks who are approaching things in a new way that may actually raise eyebrows, frankly, from a lot of the traditional kind of climate community, because, most of the narrative around cryptocurrency has been around carbon footprint. But seeing people recognize these tools can actually be put to use in totally different ways. So, appreciate you having me on here, John, and really excited to dive into some of these specific protocols and technologies that are making a big difference right now.
Definitely. Thanks, Cody. And also, kudos to you, Jason, for the MCJ podcast. It was actually you guys that prompted me to do the Terra.do course. And it looks like actually Kamala is here in the audience, which is amazing. This 12-week climate action bootcamp has totally changed my life and been such an amazing way for me to really dig into the science and connect with an incredible community of people devoting their lives to the climate crisis. So this is definitely a community effort. And yeah, super excited to dive into things. I wanted to give us about 10 minutes to set the stage, but let me lay out a little bit of an agenda here. And then I've also got,
John,
go for it.
John, I'll just say as well, like Terra.do and MCJ, I'm not part of MCJ team, but both Terra.do and MCJ were fundamental in my own transitions from being a generalist tech person to a climate-focused one. So, agree with your your shout out there to the Terra team also.
Awesome, nice, definitely cool. So yeah, the lay of the land today is we're going to try and wrap up in about 50 minutes as kind of a hard stop if anybody needs to go, but we might linger on a little bit. For the next 15 or 20, we're going to focus mostly on the Toucan protocol and the sort of emergence there. Here we have just invited up Raphael to speak, who's one of the founders of Toucan, and also Rob Dog, who's joined a few months ago and is making a huge impact. And kudos to Rob for hooking me in, bringing me into the Toucan community. But yeah, welcome, Raph. How you doing this evening? I know it's late for you, so thanks so much for joining.
Hey, John. Thanks for making this happen. It's Friday night, right? COVID makes it possible that we have that we spend Friday night in front of our computers or our phones. How I find out.
Whether that's a blessing or a curse.
Yeah, exactly. I tried to join via my computer, but I couldn't request to speak. So that's interesting.
Well, thanks for making us your kickback and chill Friday night, Raph.
Yeah, no, that's not what I meant. No, Cody, it's so cool to hear you again. We spoke a week ago, no? More or less.
Yeah, there's
podcast,
a 90-minute MCJ podcast with Toucan that just went out yesterday, so everyone should follow along with that if you want to dive even deeper.
Definitely. So yeah, there's a good piece of content there. Everybody go check that out on the MCJ podcast. But love to hear from you, Raph, about kind of why you decided to do this. What was the underlying motivation? How did this all start? And I'll start there, and then love to hear some of what you're excited about and where you feel this is headed.
Sure. I think quite honestly, part of this was born out of. So I fell down the crypto rabbit hole in 2017, like so many, and I'm an energy engineer by training, and the thing that everybody worked on in 2017 when they were in energy, and crypto was this like peer-to-peer energy market use case. And while it was super interesting, and I learned a lot about like blockchains. I always got this like pushback from friends that like are mostly like environmentalists, that crypto is so bad for the environment, proof of work, etc. I mean, everybody here knows this spiel. So this was really frustrating, because I personally think that climate change is the biggest coordination failure of our times, and a huge governance problem, and that these technologies that we have and these tools that we have at hand here are probably the best shot at addressing some of these coordination failures, right? And so when I talked to when I tried to explain that to a lot of people, I couldn't really point to real projects that would prove that point. And I was really interested in DAOs in 2019, and I started looking at the climate crisis, thought, okay, what can we do with DAOs? And then that's when I went to London, in like East London. It was like February 2020, and I hacked together the first version of Toucan. So Toucan is the hackathon project that kind of now runs under the Toucan protocol name. And what we did back then was basically, it was very similar, honestly, to what we've built now, just in a much more like hacked together version. But essentially was the idea of like bringing carbon credits on chain and then writing a solidity modifier that would allow smart contracts to automatically offset themselves to create what we called green smart contracts. And that was really, for me, the start of this completely different journey, which was carbon markets. And I have to admit, I was quite naive 2 years ago when I entered carbon markets, because it's very complex. Carbon credits are not the same. There's like compliance markets, there's voluntary markets, and then within these markets there's so many like differences, etc. So I spent a big chunk of time, I think 9 months, inside of a venture builder in London called Deep Science Ventures, which really gave me the time to look at this problem space, like Web3 and climate, and what are the leverage points that we can kind of push to like really make an impact. And yeah, that's also where another co-founder, James, kind of joined the journey, and we spent a lot of time in a room with 13 whiteboards and just cranking out ideas and like looking for the sweet spots. And after that time, and there was some frustration in between, not gonna lie, we joined Kernel, the Gitcoin fellowship, which has been an amazing journey for us. Like that's where we found just a community of like-minded people, the right, talking about culture, like the right culture of the right mindset of like collaboration. And so that's where a big part of the early team essentially came together, together with the other John X, who's a mentor at Kernel, who's now on the team, and then who's like leading a lot of this like community effort. And that's where we basically worked on the first version of the Toucan protocol, hand in hand, obviously, with the team at KlimaDAO, to launch together in it's October. It's not that long ago, even though it feels like a long time. And I'll stop here before going into
nice.
Because I realize I've been talking for a long time already.
That's perfect. That's absolutely exactly what I was hoping to hear. And I so appreciate that you've emphasized the kind of temptation as a builder to look at the complexity of the carbon market. And it's hard. There's a lot of different nuances going on, but I commend you guys for slowing down and really taking the time to understand the space, because I think at least from my perspective, some of the decisions that you've made at a protocol level in terms of architecture really do seem to lend itself towards being very flexible and meeting the needs of the supply side of the carbon market, and then now this new demand side that's being created in DeFi. I'm curious to hear how you'd sort of articulate your theory of change, Raf. It's like, we understand that climate change is really an issue of coordination and also of governance. Everybody who's watched COP26 or any of the previous ones have seen that nation states really aren't set up to solve this type of problem. It's kind of the sweet spot for, the kryptonite for the nation state, so to speak. Like, why tokenizing carbon? What about that changes something about financing in the climate crisis, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's a complex answer. So there's a couple dimensions to it. The first one is tokenizing carbon is, it's really just the first kind of building block that can unlock so many other use cases, right? And the first big use case that we've seen is carbon as a collateral, which was, beautifully pioneered by KlimaDAO, and which we now realize it's not the only protocol that has interest in carbon as a collateral asset, right? And so, but to kind of wrap that into context, so carbon offsets or carbon credits are really just positive externalities packaged into certificates, right? And the only use case today that we have for these positive externalities is to match it with negative ones and to call it carbon neutral. And if you look at the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere today, like, we understand that it's not enough today to think in terms of carbon neutrality. We have to remove a lot of carbon that has already been emitted. And in my opinion, what we have here, we have an opportunity in crypto to embed regeneration into the fabric of the economic activity, right, and into the fabric of these protocols that we're building, right? So this is, for one, kind of internalizing the cost of carbon, but also going beyond that, which is basically kind of making the economic system right now that is being built on chain regenerative by design. And this means taking a small portion of the value that is being created and kind of reallocating it, redirecting it towards regenerative practices, and kind of closing the circle. Most of our economy has been built on extraction, but we forgot to put something back, right? Put something back into the commons. And so that's kind of the high level stuff, right? And how do we achieve that? Well, we achieve this by having composable money labels, and carbon credits. Tokenized carbon credits are one of these money labels that make it easy, right? That make it easy, and to do that, it makes it easy to burn these carbon credits on chain, generate proof that something has happened, and that that carbon has been pulled out of circulation for good. And so that's really how I look at it, is that we have to use these tools that we have at hand to generate more supply, right? And so I think there's a big opportunity in project finance, kind of really using the capital that is in crypto to finance the production of more positive externalities. And then I see all these incentive mechanisms that exist in crypto just as means to kind of close this loop and kind of permanently have a kind of create carbon sinks that lock that carbon away for good. And so the opportunity here that we have is, yes, as I said, carbon as a collateral, carbon as a building block for metaverse applications, carbon as a building block for NFTs, but carbon also just as a treasury asset, right? As a diversified or a maybe non-correlated asset for big protocols to hold the credits in. Because at the end of the day, I'm super bullish on carbon as an asset class, right? And everybody is, and this is why it keeps rising. But it's really hard as an individual to invest in carbon. And the prices, and that's because this market is so hard to get access to, and it's kind of protected by some of these, like some of the intermediaries that are currently in the market. it's really hard as a retail investor to invest in the growth of carbon, or to be long carbon essentially.
Sure.
So, yeah, sorry.
So can I just sort of recap and encapsulate what I've heard here, because I think it's really interesting. So the first thing is that you've actually created programmable money backed by carbon, right? Like by tokenizing carbon, you're creating a store of value and a medium of exchange that is correlated to people sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and mitigating or preventing emissions, right? Which is really an incredible building block in its first place. But you're not the first ones, right? There's other people who've tokenized carbon in the past. And so I think there's some really interesting nuances here in terms of what you guys have done that seems to have worked. So the sort of carbon as money is one thing, as a sort of general concept thing. It's really important to get across for people looking at ReFi from the outside. It's transparent, it's programmable, and it's, like you said, it's a building block. It's a Lego that you can do different things with. You can build protocols around. KlimaDAO is just one instance of what you could do with carbon as collateral. And then the second thing...
KlimaDAO really is also... Klima for me is money, right?
Yeah.
Klima really is the... I agree with money is such a broad term, right? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you here.
Very cool.
This is really what I love about KlimaDAO, is that it's we can by putting carbon into the treasury of KlimaDAO, we can trigger a gold rush on carbon essentially, right? Because you can use carbon as you can bond carbon against to get Klima at a discount, for instance, right? So
sure.
This is very similar to how back in the day people were kind of mining gold and like bringing it to their banks and getting dollars in exchange. So anyways, I wanted to drop you there. It's just
it's cool.
This is a super powerful concept.
Yeah, it's super powerful concept. So one is, carbon as money, and we're seeing what, the BCT in this primitive and also Klima can do with that. But the other is that we can create, protocols that make the flow of this money regenerative by nature, like you said. So it's not only the thing that's moving, but also the system that controls the flow. Whereas in our current system, the flow of money is really tending to accumulate to a small few, exacerbating the accumulation of wealth in the elite. And it seems to just continue financing fossil fuels and failing to account for these negative externalities. So I think for me, this really was the vision that I was looking for as I glimpsed into DeFi. It was you could design a completely regenerative system that's an alternative to the monetary system we have today that just isn't working for our time. And I think carbon as money is really the vehicle that will enable us in this age of transition, like Charles Eisenstein talks about. And so, super excited about this, but I just wanted to touch on that piece. I'll leave it from there. Cody, I don't know if you wanted to check in on anything on that.
Yeah, so Raphael, I think, we'll obviously spend more time on the, carbon as money side, and really what I view as the demand side of what you've enabled with Toucan as we dive into Klima here a bit in a bit. I'd love to hear more from you on the supply side. When it comes to carbon, today when you look at large orgs who are trying to buy carbon, for their own net zero needs, universally we hear there's not enough high quality carbon out there. Right. And so, in the startup world, like what I see at MCJ is just incredible innovation around companies doing really amazing things for carbon removal that are high quality, nature-based solutions for carbon removal. And I'm curious how you think about the supply side and what the role of on-chain is for accelerating high quality carbon trading.
Yeah,
or
sure.
Or retirement, probably more accurately than trading.
Yeah. So, as you said, right, there's just not enough supply. There's not enough supply of high quality stuff, right? And this is part of the theory of change around KlimaDAO to kind of increase the price so that it becomes lucrative for high quality carbon to scale, right? I mean, in order to scale carbon removal, for instance, we need higher prices. So I personally think that the carbon market, especially around carbon removal, is going to develop into a futures market. You could argue that it already is, right? most of the supply is bought up for the next 2-3 years or more. So I think now that we've kind of proven the point that like on-chain carbon markets is a thing, and that there is demand coming from on-chain, but also hopefully demand that will come from off-chain via, and will use these like permissionless markets that exist on-chain. We can use that to finance hopefully the generation and to scale carbon removal and other like high quality forms of carbon assets. So this is, in my opinion, kind of the one of the aspects is to kind of create to close the circle. Right now we tokenize, and we kind of we have created the like half of the circle, which is we created the solution for the product, which is like we tokenize the product of these projects. Like now the next thing is to how do we also finance some of these projects in the first place, right?
Nice.
And I think what's going to be important there is that a lot of these new carbon removal companies, for instance, they don't want to go through Vera or some of the like other standards that have like very long cycles and like are very bureaucratic. So I think in the context of these like more data-driven technologies, I think we can use tools that are 21st century tools. I don't want to be
sure,
but essentially we want to. I think we can leapfrog straight into
definitely.
Web3
So like
for some of these.
the notion of full on-chain registries, you think is closer than probably most in the carbon markets recognize.
Totally. I mean, it's even without carbon removal, it's already big. Like even with like just Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and I mean we have Joseph here in the audience, so maybe he can speak to that as well. But it's just it becomes more and more complicated because climate change becomes a really important agenda point on like national level, and so you have governments creating sometimes carbon markets that are like have their own rules and they're like specific jurisdiction, and so essentially these registries struggle because they some credits are allowed in some markets, some other credits are not allowed in other markets. So I think we really need that like neutral kind of meta registry, if you want, that can create like that allows it to create interoperability between all of these credits, like between these markets. So yeah, kind of yeah, I think
totally.
We're pretty close, actually.
Totally. Love it. Thank you so much, Raf. Before we switch over to KlimaDAO, I want to spend a good 15 minutes diving into KlimaDAO and then cap off with Gitcoin. So I really feel like Gitcoin is kind of the heart of the DeFi ecosystem. And I've just been amazed at how Gitcoin and kernel and everything that they're doing is interwoven into everything that I've seen that is having great impact. But first, I just wanted to chat with you, Rob Dog. I have to confess, I've worked with a lot of people in the startup space, but Rob has absolutely blown me away. Is the most profound operator I've ever met in my life, and he's totally redesigned the onboarding system at Toucan. He's done a great job of creating frameworks to make it easy for people to join in and start contributing in this amazing movement that Raphael just described. Love to hear your thoughts, Rob, about the kind of organization shape and the culture that we're creating and what you're excited about internally at Toucan in context to the mission that we just heard from Raf.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I think in terms of what Toucan really is trying to build this ecosystem, and I think it's trying to be the infrastructure for that ecosystem. And I think what's really incredible with the team we built at Toucan is that it's just a lot of really awesome builders who come together. And I think we're trying to attract builders to this ecosystem. I think we're in a pretty good spot because we've been able to attract so many builders. And I think we're really trying to have that sort of builder mentality of creating new things and really moving things forward in a very pragmatic way. We're here to solve a big problem, and I think we have just a lot of people who are excited about doing that and doing that in the most effective way.
Nice. Awesome. And just kind of one of the things for me is just the sort of, the culture of communication and openness and honesty, and kind of a recognition that if we're going to build regenerative systems using technology, we also have to have a kind of regenerative place within ourselves, and a lifestyle that's sustainable, and a pace of work that's sustainable. I know it can be super intense working in crypto. The information flow is overwhelming. There's so much going on, but I've loved this space at Toucan that seems somewhat distinct from other protocols in DeFi, that feels very human to me. And I've been really grateful for what you've done there. Cody, did you want to touch off anything on Toucan before we switch over to KlimaDAO?
Yeah, I mean, Rob Dog, I'd love to just hear, for a good half of the folks listening today who, don't work in a DAO or are new to this whole crypto space and how it can help with climate change. Maybe just describe at a high level, like what an organization as a DAO looks like. How is day-to-day decision making done? How is governance done? Just to give people a flavor of it.
I mean, to be clear, Toucan is not a DAO yet, so I think but maybe I've been in other DAOs, and I think we're still trying to be sort of setting the groundwork for being a decentralized organization, so I can still sort of speak to that. I mean, I think the main difference is, if you try to decentralize the organization a bit, you have to create a bit more autonomy, and I think it's really important to have leadership at all levels of the organization. I think it creates more flexibility and autonomy, of course, but it also creates a pretty big coordination challenge for more sort of a little bit more flat and decentralized organizations. I think also another thing is, I think most decentralized organizations are highly fragmented across the world to some extent, and have to rely more on, for example, asynchronous communications. I think that's one key thing, like of things being more documented, a bit more written, can't rely as much on meetings and so forth. But yeah, I think a lot of principles of organizations still apply. I think there's a lot of similarities, though there are some of those distinct differences that come with that sort of flatness that this creates.
And it feels like one of the things I've really observed, for organizations like yours that really operate in a truly decentralized nature, is the ability for people to kind of onboard themselves as collaborators before they're, and actually be contributing to the core of what you're building without, being quote unquote, an employee or sort of onboarded in any way. And, maybe it would just be helpful for folks listening here to understand, what that looks like at the earliest of stages, and maybe even for you all as Toucan, like how you identify how to onboard people as contributors, and then how do you make the decision of like sort of bringing them into a core part of the team potentially?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I think that's a really good point. I think there, like in terms of autonomy with onboarding, I think that stems partially from like trying to have a lot of things documented and giving people the ability to by themselves be able to become a productive part of the team and be able to contribute in different areas. But definitely, I think there's that sort of fluid aspect of where you don't have like oftentimes like an employment contract and you're there for like 9 hours or 8 hours per day. Like it is, I think a lot of Web3 work is a bit more fluid in terms of you're vibing with different people, you're excited about different things, and you come and go to different places. And I think there's a big role for most of these organizations like ours to have a space for people to come and contribute and come and help, and it doesn't have to be there that they have to do this like all the time. They can do it part-time and so forth and still be really valuable member of the team. But yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects there in terms of bringing people into, let's say, more of the core of the team and so forth. I think to me that's to some extent like there's a lot of similarities with traditional organizations there, where you need to foster a certain culture. You can't just let everyone in, and you have to, and I think having people contribute is a great way to also get to know people, get to know how they work, and then be really comfortable with bringing them on later, as they wrap up their contribution.
Thanks, Rob Dog. I love it. And Sai, I've been super impressed. Oh, go for it, Raf. Sorry.
Just because Rob Dog is the perfect example, right? Just a quick story here, because we were launching the protocol. We were like, the whole team was in Lisbon. It was mid-October. We worked nights. We didn't have time to check the Discord. And do like the community work that we needed to do. And Rob Dog was in the Discord and was just running the show, like literally
Straight up. He was the only guy in it.
Saving around, completely, like owning this whole the whole communication. And so so we decided, hey, let's get Rob Dog over and let's meet this dog from the internet. And that's how we all met, right? And
I'm sure he didn't ask for permission either.
he did not ask for permission.
Love it. Great. I'm just conscious of time here. We spent a good chunk on Toucan. We could go super deep. There's an 1.5-hour podcast on MCJ if you guys want to learn more. Check that out. Definitely worth listening to. Sai, thank you so much for coming on board. I'm really grateful to have you. You're also very interesting and unique because you're bridging the gap between Toucan and KlimaDAO. I'm curious briefly before we dive into the KlimaDAO stuff, what brought you into this space and why KlimaDAO?
Hey, how's it going, everyone? So I have a background in deep tech, primarily machine learning is applied to advertising markets, which is a unique kind of market. I'm really fascinated by resource allocation, just generally. I think that's probably one of the most important aspects universally. And so I kind of come to the space with that perspective. I first came, like many of you, through Olympus. I became really fascinated how Olympus was applying game theory to essentially asset capture. In the case of Olympus, of course, they're focused on stable coins. But then when I learned about KlimaDAO, using that same mechanism but applying it to tokenized carbon, it really just lit something up inside of me. Because I think generally humans have not invented a better method than a market to align incentives. And a market's growth is literally defined by the growth of its participants. And as was mentioned here, traditionally, these carbon markets, in particular the voluntary carbon markets, they're siloed, they're opaque. And when we bridge those offsets on chain, instantly all those walls fall. And so that's how I came to the space, and it just, as soon as I learned about KlimaDAO and Toucan and what they were doing, I just immediately dived into all the materials, just spent, a solid chunk of time over many days, just really grokking everything that was happening there. And at the end of it, I had fully drank the Kool-Aid, and I knew I had to be a part of it.
So cool, man. It's been really great seeing you take leadership in the contributor Discord and KlimaDAO. Obvious that you've got a lot of experience and expertise, and yeah, it's just been one of the funnest parts for me is seeing these amazing people with random zombie avatars come in and run stuff. So it's been really cool. I'm curious to see, like, what evidence have you seen that KlimaDAO is actually moving towards its mission of raising the price of carbon? And, the price of Klima has gone down by like 80% over the last month. Like, why are you still so heavily motivated in this space?
Yeah, so generally in terms of price, I'm not too bothered by that right now. Generally in the macro, we're kind of in a risk-off environment. And when you look at just, kind of the DeFi space overall, everyone's pretty red. And then if you look at Olympus themselves, they're down, but they're down less. And I think that kind of makes sense because the backing there are stable coins. But if you look at Klima, in terms of kind of overall risk, we're right there on the edge, right? In terms of actually using markets to make a real world impact. So already if you kind of imagine the difficulty of understanding Olympus, you have to extend that difficulty to Klima. But really, Klima's not about the price, right? I think what's important is to keep your eye on the total amount of tokenized carbon that Klima is capturing within its treasury. Because if you believe that the value of carbon is going to increase over time, then it's not so much the price now of one Klima that you should be concerned with. It's the total amount of of tokenized carbon that's in the treasury. And that gives you a proxy for, the upside value of what Klima is doing over time. So that's kind of just where I'm focused. I generally have a long view anyways. I mean, we're super early everywhere. So, I mean, there's tons of upside in crypto generally. So yeah, I'm not too concerned about it. I mean, I think, talking about the value of the tokenized carbon, there's some really encouraging numbers out there already in terms of the impact that KlimaDAO has had, and Toucan has had on the voluntary carbon markets. For those familiar, with SP Global, they have stated that just in November, the floor price has surged nearly 63%. And they attribute that directly to the activity of Toucan and Klima.
And there's also that carbon pulse report that Dionysus shared that specifically mentioned Toucan and Klima. So it's working basically. And 63% is pretty hot uptick in terms of a lift of the floor price of carbon. Like, this is a lot more than I thought any of us expected.
Oh yeah, I mean, for a two-month-old project to be featured in a Macquarie report is pretty incredible, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're so early, right? And so obviously I totally expect volatility to affect us more, for sure. But I mean, already, even at the current prices of BCT, just to kind of put this in perspective, right? Imagine you had, a few acres of pine forest, right? And you wanted to cut those trees down, those logs down, and process them and sell the wood. The amount of profit that you could take per acre over a 25-year period, which is the amount of time it takes for these trees to mature, it's already more profitable for you just to go out and try to claim offsets by not cutting down those trees just purely based on the price today over, a 25-year period. And I say that because you start to see that with an increasing floor price, it starts to become a lot more advantageous globally for people not to exploit the land and instead use the land to capture positive externalities. And that's the plan, and it's already working.
So when I think about I take a step back and I look at the big picture of what Klima's trying to do, I feel like what's happened over the last few years is really, decentralization has kind of put the soul of money up for debate. Money for most of human lifetime has been backed essentially by whoever has the strongest military power. And you would argue that Bitcoin actually decentralized money and backed it by the power of compute and energy, which is why it has a huge carbon footprint, because it's actually backed by energy utilization. And Klima is sort of asking a different question, which is, what if money was backed by nature and carbon? And I'm interested how you and the team talk about that and think about that, and how much that informs, sort of your daily roadmap as you're in the deep weeds of, creating wrapped staked Klima and all of the incredibly technical DeFi work that you're having to do. It would be, I think, interesting just to hear a little bit about the philosophy behind it.
Yeah, so I think, with Klima specifically, we're really drilling into the power of the underlying growth of BCT for each staked Klima. And so if you step back, actually Klima, and particularly staked Klima, is a hedge on tokenized carbon, right? Essentially, Klima is paying you to custody your tokenized carbon within KlimaDAO, which really helps to align the idea of a continuous offsetting program. So, as an organization, you know that the price of carbon credits are probably going to increase over time, and you know that. And there's one idea where you just go to the market today anticipate your needs for the next few years, and you just buy a bunch of credits. And that's definitely a valid strategy. And then you just, offset periodically according to your needs or your pledge. But what KlimaDAO is really innovating here is this mechanism to custody that tokenized carbon, so that you actually gain a hedge on the tokenized carbon market as a whole. I mean, today, KlimaDAO is really focused on BCT, but in the near future, you're going to see different types of tokenized carbon being bonded into KlimaDAO from all different types of sources. More are going to be coming online from Toucan. Different types are going to be coming online from Toucan. And eventually, over time, you'll see that other bridges will be established to help bring other types of credits into the market. And so just in theory, it's always going to make more sense for you to hold stake Klima as a hedge than it would be just the raw tokenized carbon itself.
And that was back to, I guess, Raphael's point that we're sort of at the point of inevitability that there are going to be on-chain entire registries that are created in the coming months and years.
This is such a powerful concept. So I absolutely love that. And I think the folks at TrustSwap seems to have grokked what you just described, which is super cool. I'm conscious here. I really want to make sure people get an opportunity to dive deep into Gitcoin. I'm happy to stay after if people want to go deeper into KlimaDAO. There's like an infinite black hole here. It is absolutely fascinating what's happening in this space, but also to say that I'm interviewing Archie and Dionysus, who messaged a bit ago saying apologies they couldn't show some of the founders at KlimaDAO on Tuesday as a part of the ReFi podcast. So there should be a kind of next step deep dive into Klima that will explore some of this stuff in greater detail. But Sai, this is awesome. Feel free to stick around if you got time. If not, no worries. But there's so much stuff we could jump into. I'm loving it. And thank you for jumping on board and giving us the confidence that you have.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I'll be happy to stick around to answer questions. No worries.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, Kevin, you guys still hanging out here? Thanks for sticking with us. Or if Kevin and Scott's here. Hey, Scott from Gitcoin. How's it going, man?
Hey, how's it going, all? Just listening into the conversation. It's been awesome. And I feel like we actually have a movement around this now, which is kind of amazing, because the ReFi concept, I feel like 6 to 12 months ago is just so much further along now than it was then. So just great to be here.
Awesome, man. Thanks. Did Kevin have to bounce or?
I think he did just
cool.
to, another internal call, but
all good.
Can just definitely run things.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. I don't know you super well, but super grateful that you've carved time out. Love to hear a bit about you and your background, how you got into Gitcoin, and after that, maybe touch on the mission and the change that y'all are trying to make in the world, if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely the less Twitter savvy of the two. I'm a co-founder alongside with Vivek and Kevin of Gitcoin. I actually kind of started in the space with a similar vision and mission around how do we pay open source developers, and I came at it in 2016 from a very, at the time everything was basic, but a very basic lens of maybe we can do swaps of equity between founders of open source software companies. And the DAO hack happened. No one wanted to talk about DAOs for a while. Of course, we're well past that now, but since then a lot of my work has just been, how do we think about growing this scope of stakeholders that we work with on the Gitcoin side, and that's just been dealing with folks like the matching partners, dealing with folks like the developers going into some of our places like Kernel, which I heard mentioned earlier, and Toucan has been an amazing, almost just case study of what can happen in that environment, and that's kind of a lot of my history in the space. There's a lot of details that I probably will skip just to be mindful of time, but it's been a really great journey just to see, when we started sort of thinking about this stuff in 2017, 18, definitely felt like the focus was on DeFi and DeFi, obviously being not antithetical to ReFi, but just very focused on like the what, not really the why. And I think now we've gotten to this point where we're just like so much further along. And ultimately, the bigger question now that I'm loving to see in this particular thread is, what mechanisms can we use to fund not even just necessarily the climate, but just solving broader social problems that historically have not actually been solvable by traditional institutions. And that's kind of what crypto's about to me, at scale. It's all coordination, as Kevin would say.
Yeah, totally. It's such an interesting piece, and also recognizing the importance that open source software plays in enabling this kind of coordination. And it's been a real mind shift to me, coming from a Web 2 world with closed walled gardens, and as seeing open source really provide a core framework for all the Web 2 companies, but then everybody at some point creates a ring fence and says, this is ours, this source code's not for access, and we're going to monetize the content and the community in it. And it seems like what you guys have done by creating a business model for open source software is really accelerate that adoption of that generous spirit of like, I'm going to build this because I'm interested in it, and I only want to do this part well. I'm going to build it in such a way it can interact with this whole other ecosystem. And so it's been fascinating to see. It seems like you guys really have been a kind of core part of Ethereum's growth from the beginning. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts around the whole like quadratic funding, quadratic voting model in this particular goal to fund open source projects, because when I first glimpsed what it does and what it prevents, it was quite a sort of new milestone for me in understanding how we can change the systems of how we fund projects and how we make decisions. I'd love for you to unpack what is quadratic funding, how it can be applied to voting and governance, and how is it used at Gitcoin in terms of fulfilling your mission?
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, open source software is really the MVP of everything that we do in crypto. And I think most people recognize that, but often I think we, especially like, if you go back, actually, there's a lot of great books on the history of the web, just going back all the way to like Tim Berners-Lee and that whole sort of like Web 1 era. Like no one really was like pushing for, the idea of like open source software after about like the 1980s, like 1990s, like early 2000s. Most of the time, like that was just like centralization and like closed source taking over and like becoming the major like piece of what ultimately became like the Facebooks and the Googles and so forth. And so ultimately, that's now something that we're like revisiting and like undoing in a sense. And like that's why I think we've had the success is partly because not just are we like, we're just not just supporting open source software, but open source software is something that like we have as like an ethos, and it like is a fundamental why of, crypto, of Web3. So that to me is one big piece, but quadratic funding in particular is a really interesting kind of expansion on this general principle of decentralization, which is, okay, if we have all these currencies, we have all this capital, how do we actually allocate it in a way that is, actually democratic, that is distributed according to the will of, the public? And the public is a broader concept that's very complicated to get into because, as folks like Toby Shorin have mentioned, publics depend on like the context or like sphere in which you're living. So like if you live in New York, like New York is like its own public sphere. There's a local government. There's all these systems involved that you have to interact with. And in Web3, the public is really, not just token holders. It's also everyone who uses Web3. And so the question becomes, well, and the reason that's important is because it turns out that if we can, harness the power of tokens to empower that whole group, then we actually end up with a world in which we have more people creating more complementary tokens, which then kind of like fuel this ability for us to coordinate better. And so quadratic funding basically in a nutshell is just, if we want to take a pool of funds and distribute it to a group that may or may not have a token, because we don't know yet, where they'll go with their project, we are really focusing on as much as we can on like the earliest stages of open source software projects before they've been able to like decide on a model or path. There are certain things like KlimaDAO or like Toucan, which are doing an amazing job in in sort of becoming like DAO-like structures, I think that there's projects like Ethers.js, for example, which are like much more core software that probably wouldn't make sense to become a DAO. So the question is, across all those projects, how do we decide, what needs to be funded? And Quadratic Funding basically is Vitalik and Glenn Whale and Zoe Hitzig saying, well, let's just take basically the square of the sum of the square roots of contributions, which just means let's like not consider the dollar amount donated to each project in a given period. Let's just consider, the number of donations that are being made. And let's consider that, take the like calculation, and then distribute some pool of matching funds from all the projects that have succeeded in the space over, whatever period of time. And we'll allocate that at, the end of, say, a 2-week period, which is what we do. And so that's been really useful just in terms of signaling what does the community care about. And we're not being opinionated about what the community should care about in the process, although we obviously have like some criteria around like things that are, promoting Web3 values like decentralization or like open source software and so forth. Those are things that are also decided in our case actually now by the community through a DAO as well. So there's sort of this, I guess like the summary, like the easier way to say this is there's an evolution of, moving from a very small, you can imagine like you have like a city council, you have like maybe like 5 friends and you like hang out at a bar and you decide we're going to start like a club. And then you like slowly scale that to like 100 people to 1,000 people. The scales and like types of governance you need are very different at those scales. We've kind of gone from, just a few people to a massive like kind of organization, but our principles and the way in which we do things hasn't changed because Quadratic Funding kind of like enables us to kind of, I guess, deliver this sort of like signal to the community at large at scale, if that makes sense.
Scott, just to sort of dive into a specific use case, like I wrote a big tweet storm on Gitcoin and the whole climate grant program that you launched as part of GR12 last night actually, and I was in there messing around and funded a couple projects where I put $25 each into them, and then as you go to check out, right, Gitcoin says, hey, these 2 projects which you're $52 out of pocket or 52 DAI out of pocket are potentially going to drive $650 something worth of value to the projects you've chosen based on the quadratic matching on the back end, which I think is so powerful. A question I have for you is on the front end of choosing. And so, by the way, for folks who aren't familiar, like right now, as part of the latest Gitcoin matching rounds, there is a specific set of projects focused on climate change that also, if I understand correctly, have a specific matched dollar amount allocated to that chunk of 23 grant proposals that are in there. And I think you guys just got a big anonymous donation of $1 million focused specifically on climate change projects too. It looks like not every one of these projects is necessarily a Web3 project. Like some look like, political action groups or social action groups around climate. And I'm curious, you mentioned there was a DAO that helps make the decisions on what comes into the system to begin with. I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, there's a few really good points you brought up. One of which is I definitely should have mentioned that, yeah, we have a climate round going in particular, thanks to the efforts of KlimaDAO and Toucan and others who have supported that. And the matching funders for those rounds, like Toucan is a great example of this in particular because, going through Kernel is sort of like the starting point for them in a lot of ways. And then they're coming back and giving back to the community through this matching pool. And that cycle is like what we want to see in Web3. That's like the sort of like ReFi, like virtuous cycle that I think we can kind of create through these projects. So that's just like awesome. In terms of the...
Can you unpack Kernel for those who aren't familiar with it, just to explain what that works before you move on to the next point?
Yeah, so Kernel is effectively a learning community. It's just kernel.community. And the way it works is basically it's an 8-week program, which is pretty much just like a flexible like kind of adventure in whatever direction you really want to take, based on a syllabus actually put together by Andy Tedhope, who is just like amazing as a thinker in the space overall, and has just like written this really beautiful like sort of series of almost essays around different topics that he and others in the kernel sort of like stewards group think are relevant for like people new to Web3 to learn. So it's kind of just a way for people to get engaged in the space and start to understand what's really going on. And yeah, it's been like a great place for us to like just sort of see, you know, where the space is going, and to sort of like help shape that in more of a ReFi direction, hopefully. And ultimately that's where the climate round sort of idea came from, in part, was this like sort of motivation to think about things like education as public goods, to think about things like climate as public goods, because, well, you know, open source software is just one public good that crypto and Web3 rely on. So when we talk about, like, you know, when I said, you know, Ethers.js is this sort of core primitive, well, like in another sort of sense, like climate is pretty much a core primitive as well. And I think that ultimately what we're trying to figure out is how do we actually, you know, sustain things that, you know, one, Gitcoin itself needs to like continue existing, but also what Web3 needs to continue existing. And that includes like, you know, climate change. KlimaDAO has helped with the longevity round. And then the Ethereum Foundation has helped with a crypto advocacy sort of regulatory reform based round with groups like Electronic Frontier Foundation and so forth. So that's been just a really good like kind of way for us to expand beyond the scope of just open source software and try and think about, you know, going back to that question of like the public, like what other publics we actually serve. So yeah, to not get on too much of a tangent, like I think the big thing for the climate round right now, like, is, you know, we wanted to focus on organizations that are both Web3 native and who are just doing work in climate and Web2 generally. And we hope that this can help kind of provide a bridge between the two, so that like more projects like, you know, KlimaDAO or Toucan can start to get involved in sort of like the conversation with Web2 organizations and vice versa. Because ultimately, like, that's what we're seeing in a lot of ways with, like, you know, Facebook starting Meta or whatever. But that's not what we actually like probably want. So we probably want there to be more like, you know, the Rainforest Foundation collaborating with like organizations in Web3 and that sort of thing. So just thinking through like, how do we act as that bridge, you know, to public goods organizations that otherwise wouldn't have a chance to really get involved. And I also just very quickly want to shout out to Xavier from All for Climate, who has done like an amazing job getting a lot of those folks into the round. And I know he's in the audience there.
Amazing.
Yeah, awesome. Maybe that could be the sort of the thing we can close on with this amazing overview, because I know we're kind of hitting over our time limit here. Is, you know, for folks who have an aspiring climate project, you know, if they submit to be considered for your next wave of climate grants, what does that look like? Like, what should they expect, and kind of what's the decision making process look like on the Gitcoin side?
Yeah, so we run the rounds every quarter just to be mindful of like the community's bandwidth. We don't want to like run them continuously just to prevent like burnout or like prevent like the possibility of civil attacks, which is a lot to dive into just with the time we have. But the piece I would really hit home would just be go to gitcoin.co/grants /new, just like fill out it's a very brief, it's a very informal sort of application, which is just give us, you know, what you're trying to do, the description, basic information. And then we go through with a DAO work stream to help sort of like review the validity of the grant. We help to understand, you know, does it fit into the criteria, the eligibility policy that the work stream is set up for a given round. And generally speaking, for climate, you know, if you're doing something that is Web3 native or is like Web2 sort of native, but with sort of some traction, we're very interested in having you involved in that round. And the next one will be probably in March of next year, pretty early on. So there'll be plenty of time to kind of like get a sense of how you can get involved and like how to prepare in terms of like promoting your grant within the round and that sort of stuff as well.
Super cool. Love it. And just as we provide an opportunity, if anybody needs to bounce out from those who are speaking or co-hosting, whatever, feel free. But I recognize there's a lot of people here and a lot of energy. I'm having fun. And so I'm happy to stay here for another half hour or so, and we can open up questions from the community. But just wanted to say, Scott, I'm super grateful. I was a recipient from the Gitcoin round so far for the ReFi podcast, and we've just posted a ReFi Spring, which is like a collection of events across 2022 in cities all around the world to kind of facilitate meaningful, safe conversations like this one about the intersection of climate action and crypto communities. So super grateful, and was like crazy surprised when some anonymous dude called Momus.eth donated $10,000 to us and wrote this like crazy post. So stuff can happen.
I definitely should shout out to Momus. Momus Collective as an organization, they're all anonymous. I don't know exactly, but the group is just amazing in terms of the support they provided, and it was totally out of the blue. I didn't expect that at all to happen. So just thank you again if they're in the audience listening in.
Likewise, and just the heart space of a gift, I totally receive it and want to reciprocate and give back to the community here. So thanks. Any other closing thoughts from people speaking before we shift into community questions and kind of hang out for the next 30 or so?
I'm excited to answer some questions.
Cool. Basically anybody from the community who wants to ask questions, just request to come up and I'll accept your request. And if there aren't any urgent ones, I can keep asking questions because there's loads of stuff to dive into. I'm sure Cody can as well. But we'll give a couple minutes if anyone wants to ask stuff or come up and say. Sweet. So nothing coming up immediately. I'm curious.
I would say, John,
sorry,
people
Cody.
can also, if they're nervous to get in front of stage with a huge group of people, feel free to DM John or me your question as well. My DMs
thanks,
are open.
Cody.
Happy to take questions through that way too.
Great shout. I forget that not everybody fumbles about on Twitter public spaces. Cool. So that's definitely an option. So I think I'd love to kind of dive a little bit deeper, Sai, into the theory of change around KlimaDAO. So my understanding is that by raising the price of carbon worldwide, we will effectively push companies who've made these public net zero commitments to make a really difficult decision about whether they continue to pay a very high cost for somebody else to deal with their negative externalities, their carbon emissions, or whether they look internally and decarbonize themselves. And I guess there's obviously a third option, which is to renege on these public net zero commitments and risk public backlash and consumers switching to other brands and shareholders having opposition. But what's the kind of evidence that you've seen that this actually is an effective model for change? Curious to get your thoughts there, because we've seen countries fail to make their nationally determined contributions at COP, and there's no real accountability mechanism. What's different in the private space that means that this will be an effective means to drive decarbonization for these companies?
I mean, that's ultimately the question, right? I think we're so early, particularly in tokenized carbon, but I mean, the overall voluntary carbon markets and just carbon markets themselves, we're still very early. One thing we do know from markets is as they grow not only in size, but in legitimacy. And because there's such a push through regulation to really figure out what a global carbon market looks like, we could say, hey, these things aren't ready yet, and just stop working on them and try to wait for the perfect framework and perfect agreements and perfect, regulatory framework to really force the global community into these markets. But, typically that's not how markets are established. And so, when it comes to social pressure, I think that's obviously a huge component to helping to kickstart participation by private organizations into the market. Obviously, COP26, we had some wins there in terms of a better definition around the how the regulatory and voluntary markets interact. So that obviously helps. But overall, I think it really just comes down to doing the work today so that this market continues to grow and becomes more legitimate over time, to where organizations, regardless if they pledge or not, we eventually expect that they will have to take that decision, right? Do they continue with business as normal and pay an increasingly higher price for that business to offset their impact? Or do they start to take increasingly more efficiency decisions in order to reduce that impact and recover, that possible cost?
And I guess the key differentiator between the private market is that consumers have choice, right? There are more and more green alternative brands. And as we've seen with shareholder activism, that groups of motivated shareholders are super effective at driving change internally and holding people accountable. And so, I wanted to give a quick shout out to KlimaDAO, who's raising some funds to kind of, in a DAO format, to move forward that model of environmental shareholder activism. Love that thought, Sai, and feel free. There's a couple people who've joined to say, hey, if you want to ask other questions, just wanted to reflect on that.
Go ahead, John. Come on stage.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for organizing. This is great. My question is in regard to compliance markets, specifically how it will relate to KlimaDAO or Toucan in the future. More specifically, what do we expect the future to look like as compliance markets expand? So, for example, if one day there's a miracle and the United States implements a compliance market program, how do we expect that to change the future of KlimaDAO and Toucan?
I think we become worth a heck of a lot more.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's kind of inevitable, and I think that's just going to increase the size and scope of the on-chain carbon markets. It's just another market.
Can you maybe expand on that? So what does that enable exactly? It allows more firms to then now they're required to comply, and so you're suggesting that they'll use Klima to comply, or they'll use Toucan to comply. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's going to be, what the voluntary market is showing. Oftentimes the private sector, it leads public initiatives in terms of how they end up getting implemented, when it comes to logistics. And so we continue on our mission in the voluntary market of increasing transparency and the fluidity of these assets. As regulation comes online increasingly, a lot of those working groups that are established to figure out how to make these regulations a reality, they're going to be referring to the private market. And then I think really what we'll be seeing over time is that more of these regulatory credits are going to be increasingly tokenized, and you're going to have Toucan and KlimaDAO there to participate as best possible, as either adding them to the treasury or bridging them, etc.
And just go for it, Ref.
What we also see is that to some degree, sometimes the answer is it depends, right? Because it depends how the compliance market is implemented. We see that more and more compliance markets, like Corsia or, for instance, the Colombian compliance market, they actually make use also of the voluntary carbon market credits to as part of the compliance scheme. So it's also a question to how are these implemented in practice, and will they create their own systems? Will they be compatible? I think this is still future music, but I would love some compliance credits on chain, that's for sure.
If I can interject, I actually spent some time at the Chicago Climate Exchange many years ago, and we built a voluntary carbon market program and a futures market on top of it. And one of the interesting things that we tried to do was kind of contemplate if our carbon credits on the voluntary side would be part of a U.S. compliance program. And we actually built a kind of like a when issued U.S. Carbon credit compliance version of a carbon credit. And the disparity in price was basically like $2 on our existing voluntary carbon credit versus $12 on the when issued. So, speculators were anticipating like a 6x increase in the value should our carbon credits actually be recognized in a compliance market. So just some food for thought.
That's really interesting. Thank you, everybody. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Super cool. And yeah, I guess there's that other dimension. If there really was a very widespread adoption from the compliance and voluntary market to adopt blockchain as the medium to transact, you could also kind of balance out the issue now where a forest in Cambodia, say, claiming offsets would actually claim offsets in the voluntary market, but then be contributed towards those NDCs for that country as well. And there's a kind of double counting issue. I'm not as sophisticated in the carbon market space. But yeah, just wanted to touch that there. Cody, you said you wanted to pass on to somebody to speak.
Yeah, I think let's see. I see a question from Alejandra. Maybe you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. It has been an incredible talk. I recently heard the podcast from my climate journey, mentioning the story of Toucan, and I was really interested in how they mentioned about their horizontal approach to bring the infrastructure for many other people to actually bring value in this space, and also interested in from like the Gitcoin perspective that or all of you guys who are more familiar with the entire ecosystem. What are the way? I'm really excited about Web3 to enable collective change and like systemic change. What are both the opportunities for different organizations to actually work together and build kind of like the building blocks of a growing ecosystem, like the opportunities to bring value out of partnerships and collaborations, such as how Klima and Toucan grew together and improved from each other, but also what are the spots that you see that there are some maybe gaps in the system that still need to be filled by other organizations, and where like do you see opportunities to actually new organizations to come up or new ideas and innovations to bring more value in the space that you still haven't seen coming up? I don't know if there's any sort of ideation around this.
Maybe Rafael, you want to take that first, since she referenced the conversation you had in the pod?
Sure. I mean, this is the beauty of Web3, that we can create, we can align incentives around open source, open source models, and we can make the commons. We can create business model around commons. I think Griff Green is a lot better at explaining all of that. Unfortunately, he's not here, but yes, I mean, this is basically the idea of these different building blocks. I won't go into that specifically, but in terms of what is left to build, I mean, it's so much. Like we it feels like we have different ecosystems that need to merge, right? As I said, with this ecosystem, now that we have carbon as a money Lego, I can think of so many cool things, PFP project, NFT profile picture projects that kind of make use this on-chain data to kind of generate cool profile pictures that match your positive impact or stuff like that. That kind of visualize a lot of that. Julian, I think you need to read. Another aspect would be metaverse. I'm really excited about all these different interpretations of what we can do, because the cool thing, what the gaming sector does really well is to create small economies, right? Games are small economies where people they create create their own currency within like a virtual world. And this is the perfect environment, in my opinion, to create incentives towards regeneration, right? By using some of the value that is created inside these games and redirect it into like real world impact. So that's definitely one. I think the whole like measurement part is another one that is still hard, like understanding the footprint of, understanding the footprint of blockchains, understanding the footprint of transactions, and kind of automating a lot around that part. So, also make it easy to like understand the footprint of goods, right? Like we don't have to stop at like the footprint of infrastructure, but we can think about the footprint of products as well. Then, I mean, there's a whole like future finance bucket, but also, right, like the more like project specific, more project specific carbon offsets, right? Right now we have, with Toucan, we've created these big these pools that are essentially like reference contracts for different types of carbon, but for some project it doesn't make sense to bridge your tokens right now or to bridge your credits right now, because the price of these pools is nowhere where you need, it's not the like rational decision for you to bring them on chain. But we can still create markets that are like OTC type transactions using the TCO2 tokens inside of Toucan that are like project specific. So so there was a lot of like idea dumping, but happy to go into like more detail when it's not super late, because I realize my brain is kind of zooming out here.
No, that's great, Rob. And I think even just looking at some of the use cases that are staring at us right here on this group spaces, right? You've got Klima, which launched built on the Toucan protocol in terms of bringing BCT into the Klima treasury, and then you've got Gitcoin, who said, hey, we were able to launch a big part of our matching grant program because of the contributions of Klima and Toucan, through Kernel. And then you've got groups like Carbonized, who I know is on this call down below, that is building an NFT that is actually based on BCTs. So when you buy an NFT, you're actually having to buy carbon credits through the Toucan protocol in order to actually purchase the NFT, thus locking them into the NFT. We had the Open Earth Foundation raise a bunch of money through NFT projects for ocean restoration over the last week, including an NFT that had if I understood it correctly, a staked Klima embedded into it, so that you essentially can never retire that staked Klima ever, which means it's always accruing new dividends from the Klima treasury for its ongoing life. So just seeing like different projects like this sort of build upon each other, and then in the Gitcoin registry, in the Gitcoin climate grants right now, one of the projects that's up for funding is EdenDAO, which is trying to build a carbon futures market, which presumably will have overlaps with Toucan in the future. So like I think when people talk about money Legos, like these different building blocks that groups use, to me is just, it's fascinating to see them build upon themselves. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, or if we want to move to another one of the questions.
Real quick, I would like to add that we're at a very important spot right now where we're just having the tools that we need to actually approach other organizations in the crypto sphere and really open that discussion about what is your footprint right now, right? What chain are you on? What is that footprint? Especially a call out to the builders out there today, especially those that work in any kind of analytics or data analysis. Really what we need to do is redirect the social pressure that's placed on crypto today. We need to redirect that onto specific organizations to incentivize them to offset their footprint continuously. And so for the builders out there, that means how can we capture that on-chain data, to capture that footprint, And right next to it, you could almost imagine on the same screen, right next to it, look at what types of tokenized carbon assets they're holding, BCT, staked Klima, and what the growth of that is over time, so that it becomes very clear the organizations that are in parity with that footprint. These are the types of tools beyond that sit on top of these money Legos that are really going to enable the industry, especially starting in crypto, to really take advantage of these tools and to rally people around actually using these tools to continuously offset their footprint regardless of the project type.
That's awesome. So helping us solve our own problems within the crypto community, essentially.
Exactly. I mean, what business do we have going out to the traditional organizations saying, hey, you need to do X, Y, Z, when we haven't really done it internally in our own industry?
One thing I'd like to open up is, with TracerDAO, we're actually helping projects create Oracle price feeds and helping them deploy essentially derivative and risk management infrastructure for their protocols and their users to help manage risk. And this could easily apply to ReFi and carbon markets. So any builders out there that are looking to embed risk management tools, please feel free to reach out to us at TracerDAO.
Awesome. Well, listen, I think what we'll do, we've got 2 hands up still. I know we're going on an hour and a half here. So Joven and James, let's let each of you get your questions in. Let's try to answer them quickly and, let people, move on. And we can keep going with this forever, but we also want to make sure that we time box these so we don't exhaust people. And, we try to do these hangouts, once a week on Fridays. So, Joven, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I'll keep it brief. Appreciate everyone setting this up and kind of walking through all this. I was wondering, I guess, in the context of the Toucan protocol, do you see potential room for expansion into other types of credits, like biodiversity, ecosystem based credits or species credits, anywhere where there's kind of a global protocol that's available? I know those tend to happen more in compliance markets, but there are starting to be some voluntary markets in some of these alternative positively environmental impact credits. And I was wondering if there's ever a perspective on either that or other types of emissions-based credits and the expansion to bring those on-chain, or the possibility to even start the protocol on-chain.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons that we actually changed the name from CO Toucan to just Toucan Protocol, because CO Toucan was kind of limiting in the sense that it has CO2 in the name, and we didn't want to carry that because, as you said, right, carbon today really is just a proxy for a lot of other important things that are happening as well, as you mentioned, biodiversity, but also just water and air and all, so it obviously, it's just that there's a market for carbon. This is why we're starting there. But let's please, we have as much a biodiversity crisis as we have a climate crisis. So if we just put the blinders on and just think carbon, we're never going to make it. So
totally. And yeah. I just want to touch on that. Thanks so much, Joven. I think I'm about to publish a post around what is ReFi. And my vision here is that there's really kind of 3 pillars. There's stabilizing the climate, of which carbon is a core asset. There's cultivating biodiversity and preventing further biodiversity loss. But then I think we can go even deeper and look at how we can create new money systems that actually cultivate social equity and restore some of the justice that we had when communities were smaller and worked together better. And so that's just a tipping point. But yeah, last one. Love to hear from you, James, and then I'll do a quick recap and we can let people go. It's been a great session, 90 minutes.
Yeah, hey, thanks everyone for having me. Love that we're kind of helping facilitate and learn in public. And shout out to Cody and team at my climate journey. So my question, right? As a person who's been in tech for a while, we've been working on our climate idea and company. And so we're right now just really early in designing our product and our company and the structure. And so I was curious from the group, what advice you would have the founders, both on like the trade-offs between Web 2 and Web 3 for both company and product design, right? And just to give examples, if you're trying to build something in the energy system, like energy and utilities are really conservative. And so like, could that come back to bite you? Or what if you see the promise of kind of like incentivizing the community to own a piece of what you're building with NFTs, but then, you have to kind of think about on-chain versus off-chain, and like, do you use money? Do you use tokens? Like, there's no playbook for Web3 and climate at this point, whereas like Web2 is a whole lot more straightforward. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on just thinking through all these trade-offs in product and company design as this kind of evolves.
I mean, that's a pretty tricky question. I mean, I think it's very context dependent. I think there's a huge set of opportunities in Web3 and climate and ReFi, and I think that's a very fast growing space. I think if there's a model that will make sense, I think even if that's a new space, I think it being a new space creates a lot of opportunities. But with that said, like I kind of subscribe to the idea that like there is no such thing as good advice, or like, you can't just take like random advice from the internet. Like, I think it's very context dependent, and but yeah, would be happy to have a chat if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I can just agree with that. Like, I would say it depends on who you want to work with. Like, you really have to love what you do. You have to love also, you have to love the people that, not just the people that you work with in your team, but also the people that are, your customers or your users, or so that's, I think this can help to kind of define like what is the best, or like the right structure. Surely going with Web3 might be like more exploratory, but on the other side, like it just makes you future compatible. But I mean, who am I to give you any advice without knowing exactly what what you're working on? So, but all I can tell you is that it's fun. Like, the space here is fun, and
yeah. So oh, sorry, go for it, Cody.
I'll say one final thing, and then maybe you wrap it up for us. So one other thing to think about too is, and I had someone DM me this, which I didn't get a chance to ask the question, which is, it's still technical, right? It's still hard, like bridging over to the Polygon Matic network and buying BCT there and working on working through a liquidity pool to whatever, buy stake your Klima or whatever. These are challenging things to do still for most people, and so I think part of it, as well as if you're building product, think about who your audience is, but then think about how you are going to make your business and your product future-proofed as well, knowing that this stuff is all coming. And I think for the builders on the call too, it's thinking about how do we continue to also make the user experience for each of these things continue to be easier to use, so that more and more people have these tools at their fingertips. But where we are today is light years ahead of where we were a year ago. That's for sure.
Definitely. Sai, did you want to just touch on that briefly before I wrap up?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, just generally from a startup perspective, don't be afraid to do the things at first that don't scale. You don't have to make a perfect system at first. And when you're dealing with the real world assets and, how that interacts with on-chain assets, just think real long and hard about how you handle custody. But again, it's, just get started, get it out there, get the market to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and garner the help that you need. At Klima, we have 50,000 people in the Discord, right? We have almost 100 in the contributor, and we have almost 60,000 wallets, unique wallet holders, and this is all just over the last couple months. Right. And so that really speaks to the power of an idea, like what Core and what Toucan has been able to put together. Put it out there.
Yeah, for sure. The Toucan docs are a great example of that, right? It's very clearly a stepwise sort of view of how to onboard carbon from the Vera registry. And it's clear that it's a very V1, but it's working right now as a V1, which is fantastic.
Yeah, appreciate all the answers and totally fair. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Joseph, I'm going to give you 30 seconds here. You asked to speak at the very beginning, and I didn't give you a chance to. So feel free to chime in, but I do want to wrap up here. So last one here. Thanks.
Sure thing. Well, I'll do the obligatory props to all the hosts and speakers and listeners. Been a great session. Really appreciate it. Really great to get to deep dive into all of these things. And that previous questioner about Web 2, Web 3, making decisions around this, no playbooks. I gotta say, I think that I would say it's on. Like, I think that now is a great time to be building your business in the space. If you are feeling FOMO, that just means like hustle, chop. But I think that a lot of the underpinnings are getting built as we speak. We are having, I think the Toucan documents on how to do the process are very clear, and you can now do this. We now have the tools. We didn't 4 or 5 years ago, and we do now. So encourage people in this space to find the really good use cases, find the use cases that are going to survive any bears or any sort of drifting of interest, and the use cases that can really help beat climate change and employ Web3 tooling, Web3 community, Web3 vision to make that happen. Thanks. And I'm Joseph Palantin, founder of Blockchain for Climate Foundation, and we're building a platform to put Paris Agreement on the blockchain. You can now countries can put their Paris Agreement Article 6 carbon credits as soon as the first one of those is ever created in the world. We are working to enable those to be put on Ethereum. Thanks.
Super cool. Absolutely love that. So glad we got a chance to hear what you're up to. There's so many amazing people here. Thank you everybody for showing up. Like Cody said, we're trying to do this every week, at least for the time being. I don't want to hog this space. If there's other people who are keen to facilitate, we can suggest focusing in on other protocols. I know I'd love to do a deep dive into Regen Network and look at some of the stuff that they've been doing for a long time. They really know this space and have created a great foundation. But yeah, this is a safe space to have meaningful conversations and ask hard questions, and just want everybody to feel welcome to participate, and let's shape this ReFi movement together so that we can address this climate crisis at scale. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, John.
Cheers.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, everyone. And if you are interested in the mission of Toucan or Klima, make sure you join the Discords, and also check out the Planet of the Climates podcast. KlimaDAO recently launched.
Boom.
Everybody is hiring.
See you guys.
The world needs help.
Hiring.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. We got jobs. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
I can't actually end this thing. Okay, there we go.